Day 417 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And we'll quickly slide across to those Russian losses, as Russia is currently sitting on 182,070 military personnel losses. And in terms of hardware, this includes 4 tanks, 10 APVs, 10 artillery, 1 air defense system, and 1 aircraft. So certainly not a bad day for losses, if I can put it that way. Then we'll move back to the map and we'll start out all the very way north, all the way to the borders of Finland today. So, still gotta go a bit further here. That's the one, Helsinki. Yep, okay. So we start here today as the Finnish have started building fences along their borders to Russia, as Helsinki is now looking to prevent a large influx of migrants to their country. And in terms of the fences themselves, they're 10 feet tall, or about 3 meters in height, including barbed wire and surveillance, as Russia continues to get locked out both economically and geographically on the world stage at this point. And now we'll travel away to somewhat central west of Russia itself. So I'm looking for Kazan. Here it is, right there. Check out the Cartman. So there was a powerful explosion near a tank training ground at its adjacent ammunitions depot in the last day. Now, some sporadic reports suggested that it was internal sabotage to avoid being sent to certain death at the front lines. But I'm also not opposed to the other likelihood that Russia simply has a bad record and reputation when it comes to munitions handling, and all of the safety standards that should go along with that. Either way, as I like to say, a win's a win. But more specifically, this one started out as a fire and then upgraded to, then the explosions ensued shortly thereafter. Then we'll travel back into the Ukrainian map today. That's what it's all about. So we'll move across to the Donbass in the north somewhat. As many marks behind the front line, there were explosions reported at the Russian-occupied location of Rubizna, so this spot right here, which appears to be as a result of incoming missiles, presumably from a HIMARS platform, destroying 2 large ammunitions depots of the Russian armed forces. Then we'll move down a bit to Bakhmut, as we usually do at the moment, where the frontline situation is very precarious. Still, and remains the absolute epicenter of hostilities. But hey, it still exists. And Bakhmut somewhat holds still. But what I'll do is I'll switch gears today and give you an idea of the front line as per one of the Ukrainian brothers in arms perspectives, as per a Telegram message where he says there's meat assaults all the way along the railway station line, which is along here as per my cursor, which is nearing to the center of the city, and that hot battles exist day and night. He also goes on to say there has been Russian attempts from the north and the south, but were repelled and those forces just retreated. But he also said, quote, "Orc losses are beyond logic," and that the VDV are dying like anyone else. And the VDV being the Russian airborne forces. So specifically an actual arm of the Russian military itself, as opposed to just the Wagner forces, who are starting to play a much more limited role in this region now. Then he also says there has been some successful Ukrainian counterattacks in the region, right up to the frontline contact points, in fact, which has been reflected on the map somewhat in the past few days, where it's been a bit of a to and fro situation there near or around the train line at the center point there. But then to sum it up, he says there's still loads of Russian meat, his words, not mine, as well as artillery and aviation, especially in Bakhmut. So very particular to Bakhmut here, as Russia's desire to capture Bakhmut is like taking Berlin for Russia, or at least for the Soviet Union way back when. And that Russia will keep coming despite losses, heavy losses. And so he finishes it all off with saying, defense is still standing, even though it's difficult as always. So in the end, despite the massive Russian losses occurring, Russia is still determined to stop at nothing to capture the town, which is not surprising. They really need this as a political win to save face even the most of minute amounts. Then we'll move down on the map again today to Avdiivka, so Bakhmut 2, as it's sometimes called, a little bit more wider of a front line, a little bit more difficult for any invading force to manage as a result. So we have here where today's attempt of the Russian military's landing troops failed again and ended tragically in this location. And a location which has been pretty well fortified with Ukrainian defenses since about 2014. And then zooming out, so somewhere else in the east, another Russian Su-25 lost its wings, so was taken down. This actually may have happened yesterday, with a report about it only coming out today, as far as I can tell, but it was included on today's reports. It was the one aircraft lost. Then just lastly in this region, somewhere else in the east, 2 Russian vehicles got stuck in the mud and were abandoned by their crew. So it looks like a Russian BMP-3 on the right and possibly a 2S9 on the left. So an infantry fighting vehicle and possibly a self-propelled mortar, like a mortar on wheels basically. And it never ceases to amaze me that Russian soldiers frequently leave their vehicles intact as they abandon them on the battlefield without disabling it for the enemy to just capture it. And the enemy in this case is Ukraine, so Russia's enemy. And off they run. Oh, and not to mention they clearly got stuck in the mud, as there was no intelligence gathered regarding weather or anything like that just prior to their assaults, obviously. But worry not, that mud appears to have dried up now by the looks of things, and the Ukrainian forces, their salvage crew is here to take the spoils. Then I'll move across to some news for today. So Denmark is about to deliver its Leopard 1 main battle tanks to Ukraine soon. These will be the 1A5 blocks, which were produced in the 80s. And all in all, many operators have pledged several hundreds of these Leopard 1s to Ukraine so far, and I would expect several hundred more sooner or later as well. And then in some more hardware-related news, so the Ukrainian armed forces are starting to get an influx of 120mm mortar shells after serial production kicked in some time ago. So these ones were in fact spotted in the field. And similar influxes at small volumes are starting to occur with serial production of other munitions as well, such as the Soviet 152mm artillery shells and the NATO standard 155mm shells as well. So over time, Ukraine's artillery replenishment gap will turn into a well-oiled machine due to the might of the Western industrial capacity. But I don't think they're quite there just yet. Then in some other news, Russia is now talking about the idea of a military tax to support its war in Ukraine. And yes, technically we all pay a military tax as part of government revenues from income tax, sales tax, etc. But the Russian authorities are salivating over the idea of double dipping into Russian citizens' post-tax earnings now by taking yet another chunk out of it. And I, for one, might even support this measure because nothing says sowing the seeds of internal discord for a nation and civilian rebellion better than getting taxed to the moon for a war you accepted tacitly and mindlessly for the last year. Then in some other news that I could have mentioned earlier during the Bakhmut part of the map, so Nutsack and seedy Uncle Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner PMC, has just suggested that Russia should end the war now and declare that the intended results have been achieved. So perhaps he's having some sober realizations, he's off the vodka. Because if we go back and have a little bit of a look at the timeline, first he's gone from saying we have captured Soledar to we can take Bakhmut to we can reach the borders of the Donbass within 2 years. Remember when he said that a few months ago? To now he says, let's just call it a day. We've had a good run. So perhaps he's just going through all 5 stages of grief, or defeat in this case, and has reached that final stage of acceptance with rhetoric like this. Then I'll move across to the lighter side of news just quickly, as this is more of a Russian surrender segment, if anything. But another Russian crew surrendered a tank for a reward after seeing what happened to their first column, so they've mentioned there. And then, in some very relatable news, these people chose to live in a normal world as well. So, for the first time, Russian soldiers handed over a Buk missile system for a reward to the Ukrainian army. So, everyone gets to be a winner. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder, yesterday Russia adopted a new law where electronic mobilization subpoenas will be considered delivered from the moment they appear in the person's online inbox, limiting the ability of future mobics from leaving the country, for instance, or avoiding the draft. And they get just 7 days as well, which is to pretty much get their affairs in order because they are off to the meat grinder, pure and simple. And I've got to say, they really rushed that 60-page law through their parliament within 30 minutes, passing unanimously. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Peskov called the draft law on electronic subpoenas important for the, quote, convenience of citizens. Yeah, right. But it gets even worse than that, because if you attempt to dodge the draft, which it's not technically, it's the military service, it'll just turn you into a mobic for mobilization still. But if you dodge it, they will then take away your driver's license, and you cannot register as a property owner. You've also got only very limited access to banking services. You can't get loans, things like that. And if you have a business, they'll pull your registration. I mean, they are really sticking it to their own citizens, treating them like garbage as always here. Then in just a final funny to round it all off with, I've got quite a few funnies, but they'll have to wait for later videos. But it appears dreams can come true, at least for me, Juzzy, because if you're a fan of this channel, for instance, then you're probably also a fan of Russia deploying older and older tech in the field and having a bit of a laugh at that, as the Russian army has indeed started to use the T-55 tanks, 80-year-old tanks, as some were spotted in Zaporizhia. With these pictures distributed from a pro-Russian Telegram channel, we also have some slightly older footage of T-55s on their way to the front lines from Russia as well. And this is all just one big far cry from the army that invaded just over a year ago now. But wait, there's more. Turns out they sent them without even upgrading them either. Which is funny because it was only a few weeks ago where I was half jokingly saying that the only prerequisite Russia has for sending these ancient tin cans to the front line is so long as their engine turns over and they can drive the things. And I've got to say, originally spec'd T-55s from the 50s, not even originally spec'd because they are truly rust buckets now. These things should be child's play, even for the Leopard 1s, let alone Leopard 2s, Challengers, and Abrams. Hell, even a dropped drone munition could send these things back to the mechanical Stone Age from where they came. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.